Now we're going to talk about what we call audit of a group, or by a group, I guess I should say, or kind of some of each. Obviously, some of your clients are very large, international, have components you as a financial statement auditor aren't qualified to deal with. So you're bringing in other people on this audit, all right? Maybe there are a bunch of different divisions and components, and some of them are overseas. Maybe some other auditors conduct a material portion of the audit. There are auditors who specialize in things like inventory, so maybe you bring in somebody like that. Component auditors, a lot of times, especially when maybe you're a small auditor and they have, your client has divisions other places, you get people in other places to do that part of the audit. So there's a lot of perfectly legitimate reasons why there'll be auditors other than your firm engaged on an audit. So any of these could be going on. So here's our decision tree for when there's a group of auditors. So it kind of boils down to a couple of things. Are you, as the auditor, willing to take responsibility for that stuff? I mean, a lot of times, remember, in typical world scenario, the same auditors are auditing these clients every year. So you audit this client every year. Their French division gets audited by the French auditors every year. You work, it's fine. You like those auditors. They're great. They do good work, and they always have, right? So you're fine taking responsibility for that part of the audit. In other words, you'll just say, yeah, fine, I'm fine with it. So if you're fine with that auditor and you don't want to name them separately, in other words, you don't want to say that somebody else did that part. You're fine with going like, oh, it's just an audit, standard audit. If you take responsibility for that auditor's work, then you go with a standard report, right? These financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. You don't have to do a thing. But let's suppose you're not willing to take responsibility. It's like, well, I've never hired these people before. They've come and audited this batch of assets. They specialize in oil and gas, and they've told me this asset value is this. I don't even have any way to check it. All right. So now I decide, well, in my audit report, so I'm not willing to take responsibility for what they did, because I don't even have a way to check it. I'm expecting them to tell me what it is. So now I go, okay, I'm either going to name them and say they did that part of the audit, or I'm not going to name them. In other words, I'm going to say, we did this audit and somebody else did that part, right? So I'm either going to name the name of that auditor or not. And if I name them, then we have an unmodified opinion and we just indicate who did it. And if I am going to name them, then I have just present their report, right? They have their own opinion, and I present their opinion if they're being named. If I'm not naming them, I say somebody else did this part. Okay. So, obviously when you're having some kind of group reporting, you do try to make sure that they're good reputation, they are independent, and they communicate with you. And the options, as we discussed, you can take responsibility for your work, then you don't have to do anything. Same report, unmodified opinion. But let's suppose we're going to name them. All right. Well, if you're going to name the name, in other words, this firm did the part of the audit in France. Well, then you're just take their audit report and present their audit report. You don't combine it with yours. Now, if you're going to refer to them in some way and say, well, we didn't audit this one part, somebody else did. All right. So what you do then is, in the auditor's responsibility section, right, you say, we did not audit this other part, right, this wholly owned subsidiary, right, and here's what it consists of, and we didn't audit that. And they're saying based on our audit and the report of the other auditors, but not naming them, it's fairly presented. So that way people know, okay, you didn't actually audit that part. So here is a little summary table. I like it. It talks about what kind of report to do when. Now, typically everything's fine, right? The financial statements are fairly presented, and the auditor was able to do their job and meet their responsibility, I guess. In other words, there was no scope limitation. You were able to meet your responsibility. But sometimes there's a departure from GAAP, and you know it, right? You've done your audit and you say, well, this is not fairly presented. Well, if it's not material, that's fine. Still do a standard report, right? If it's material but not pervasive, you do that little qualified, okay, except for this. If your departure from GAAP is material and pervasive, then you give what's called an adverse opinion. You know they're wrong, so you say this is adverse. A scope limitation is when you were not able to fulfill some part of your responsibility under GAS. You didn't get to observe inventory or whatever. Right? So a scope limitation, if it's not material, great, standard report. But if it's material but not pervasive, qualified opinion. If it's material and pervasive, you do what's called a disclaimer. In other words, we don't know, because if you've got a material misstatement, I mean, if you've got a scope limitation that could be material, it could affect many accounts, you basically don't know if they're fairly presented or not. So, because you weren't able to do an actual full audit. So then you just say, disclaim, we don't know. We have no opinion. That's basically what you're saying. Sometimes somebody else helps you on the audit. If you assume responsibility, you do that standard report. If you do not assume responsibility, you bring their work into yours. All right, so when we come back, we're going to talk about other matters on our last video.